It was a different kind of Passover, to say the least. I remember right when we sat down, Philip leaned over to me and he whispers, "Hey, Thomas, I feel like something special's gonna happen tonight." I looked at him. I said, "I doubt it." I was wrong. Jesus got up from the table. He walked over and grabbed a basin of water and a towel. And I remember at the time thinking to myself, what's Jesus doing with the foot water? I doubt he's going to wash somebody's feet. I was wrong. He knelt down and began to wash Bartholomew's feet. Bart just sat there. He didn't say anything. He didn't move. None of us did. Jesus finished and went on to James and Andrew and the rest of us. I remember at the time thinking, this is so strange, yet wonderful. And then I thought, I doubt anybody's going to say anything right now. I was wrong. You know who broke the silence? Peter.
No way you're going to wash our feet. I mean, that's what I told him. He could wash other people's feet, but he wasn't going to wash mine. I looked at him and I said, Jesus, you're not going to wash our feet. I mean, you're the king. And he looked at me and he said, well, then you can have nothing to do with me. And I'm like, ouch. Okay, wash my feet, wash my hands, wash my whole body if you have to. He looked at me and said, no, your feet will be fine, Peter. In the midst of him washing our feet, he teaches us servanthood.
Then Jesus took some bread and some wine. He blessed it and he served it to us. He said it was a new covenant with his blood. And he said, tonight, all of you will lose faith in me. I remember thinking right then, lose faith in you? Never. But I didn't say anything. I just sat there.
I couldn't just sit there. I had to say something, so I looked at him and I said, Jesus, I love you. You can count on me. Everybody else may fall away, but I will not. You can count on me. He looked at me and he smiled. And he said, Peter, you'll deny me 3 times for tomorrow morning. Ouch. The next thing I knew, we were wrapping things up and we were headed to the garden to pray.
Once we got to the garden, it just got crazy. Jesus asked Peter, James, and myself to go further in the garden with him and pray, and we did. We tried. We kept falling asleep. Jesus kept waking us up. I remember one time he said, the spirit is willing, but the flesh is weak. That's true. It's all a blur. And I think this whole mess got started because of Judas. Did he really think what he was doing was right?
There he is. He's the one you want, the one praying by himself. Now the others, they will come up and try to create some scene. But the one that I kiss on the cheek, that's the one you want. Now 30 pieces of silver, right? That's what we agreed upon? 30 pieces. Forget about the rest. The one that I kiss on the cheek, that's the one you want.
A kiss? Judas betrays Jesus with the kiss of a friend? And then it got crazy. Peter grabs a sword and he cuts off this guy's ear. And Jesus just reached down and picked it up and put it right back on the guy's head, as if nothing had happened. And then they took him. I'd love to tell you that we fought for him, but we didn't. Everyone ran. I ran. I'm so ashamed.
What have I done? What have I done? Was I so stupid to think that I've killed him? I've killed him. I've crucified Jesus.
I crucified Jesus. It's what the crowd wanted, and that's what they got. And personally, I don't feel like that man did anything to deserve that, but I was just a soldier doing my job. When the governor gave his sentence, that's when I would go to work. I loved that job. I felt like I was administering justice every time I nailed someone to a tree. But that man didn't deserve that. Didn't make sense to me.
It makes no sense. There I was, rotting in a jail cell for stealing, murdering. You name it, I've done it. And I knew the next time I stepped foot outside that jail cell, well, and that was it. So the guards, they came and got me, and they put me beside this guy that was beaten to a pulp. Then Governor Pilate started asking the crowd, which one of these men do you want me to set free? I mean, it was obvious. I mean, the crowd, they're going to say, let Jesus go. And then I was going to tell them where they could go. And then the crowd, they started chanting Barabbas. I mean, they were saying my name. They were saying my name over and over and over again. The guards, they threw me to the crowd, and they took Jesus to Golgotha. I mean, one minute I am a man marked for death, and then the next I'm free. It made no sense. So I followed him all the way to Golgotha.
I was stationed at Golgotha that day. We just raised the second criminal when they brought him to me. I'll never forget the way he looked. He'd been beaten, spit on, whipped. He was unrecognizable as a man. Hideous. What was left of his clothes were stripped off of him, and he was thrown down on the cross. That's when I went to work. Generally, when you crucify a man, the first hand is the most difficult. The criminal wants to get away, he fights you. So I would have 2 soldiers hold him down, but this guy, he didn't put up a fight. I just thought he was exhausted. As an executioner, I've been called every name in the book. I've had men yell at me, plead with me. But I wasn't prepared for that. He looked at us. He looked at me. And he said, "Father, forgive them. They don't know what they're doing." He forgave me.
Forgive them. He said, forgive them. Who is he? Forgive. It should have been me up there. I was the one that was supposed to be hanging on that cross. He took my place. Then I looked up, and I remember he took a deep, agonizing breath, and he said, "It is finished." And then he died.
Surely, this man was the Son of God.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you for being here this morning, and those watching on our live stream, welcome to you as well. I've entitled this message, The Journey, with the question, does it continue? And today we're going to find out whether it does or not. Last week we talked about two kings that had entered Jerusalem on that same day. One king entered on a horse from the west, garbed in war paraphernalia, showing his power to everyone who might threaten his kingship. And then we heard about Jesus entering Jerusalem from the east, riding on a donkey, garbed in palm branches, representing a different type of kingdom. Jesus was on a journey that day. And as we've seen and heard on the video, this journey led Jesus to the cross, or as I like to say, through the cross, as his journey did not stop there. Which brings us to today. Today is Easter Sunday. And Easter Sunday is a day when followers of Jesus typically would shout and sing and enthusiastically celebrate the resurrection because Jesus has risen. He has risen from the dead. Now, I don't mean to put a damper on things, but I think perhaps that our celebration is often poorly informed. Because I think that when we talk about the resurrection, we are often talking about a concept that is far too detached from the emotional turmoil and bitter disappointment and the unfairness of life that we have to live. So today I want to help us understand that to talk about resurrection in a place like this is to raise some very powerful questions that challenges the chaos of life. To talk about resurrection is to talk about a mother struggling to cope with her child. To talk about resurrection is to talk about a young man whose life is eaten up by depression and anxiety. To talk about resurrection is to talk about a marriage that didn't work out. To talk about resurrection is to talk about a child in Africa where hunger and HIV and abuse and rape is a daily fact of life. To talk about resurrection is to talk about the ugly stuff, and it is to talk about it in a way that questions the permanency of the ugliness. To talk about resurrection is to ask the question, does my life have to be the way it is? Do those things that are happening have to be the way they are? And I say that because I want you to understand that the language of the Bible is to talk about resurrection is not to talk narrowly about what happens after you die. You see, most cultures in the ancient world had a highly sophisticated theology of life after death. For example, the Egyptians had a very elaborate way of understanding their afterlife. Here's an afterlife scene from the Valley of the Kings. In their way of thinking, a dead person would be judged, and during this judgment, the god Anubis would weigh the heart of the dead person against the thing called a shoe feather, and if their heart was lighter than the feather, they got to enter the afterlife. However, if it was heavier than the shoe feather, then they got eaten up by the demon god Ammit. So ancient cultures had these ideas, these elaborate ideas about life after death. And in the Western world, especially here in North America, we are no different. We are obsessed with leaving this earth and not getting left behind. We are obsessed with what happens after we die, with what heaven will be like. And in some cases, I've seen some people make Christianity sound like an exit strategy from this world. But that let's get off this planet type of thinking was not the culture in which Jesus was raised. Jewish theology was not at all preoccupied with the idea of life after death. But what did fascinate them was that as they looked at the world in which they lived, they knew things were broken, that somehow something was not right with life. And one of the key ideas in the Hebrew Bible is the idea of God repairing the brokenness. And in the ancient world, the concept of repairing became known as resurrection. When the Hebrew poets spoke about the concept of resurrection, they often did so by talking about bones. In ancient Palestine, this scene is wrong. This animal should not be dead. There is something desperately wrong with this picture. This animal should be alive, enjoying life. This scene is all wrong. Just like abuse is wrong. Just like poverty is wrong. Just like sickness is wrong. Just like loneliness is wrong. Just like when your life goes off the rails. And into this wrongness, the prophets and the poets spoke of God putting everything back together again. It was the theology of Humpty Dumpty. The most famous example of this is Ezekiel's poet vision of the valley of the dry bones. In Cyrillic language, God says to his broken people, I make breath to enter you, and you will come to life. I will attach tendons to you and make flesh come upon you and cover you with skin, and you will come to life. And so in Hebrew ancient times was born the concept of a resurrection, a concept where men and women living unbroken lives in an unbroken world. To speak back then about resurrection was not to speak about leaving this world and going to a better one. It was to speak about the one that they're in, becoming better for everyone. And like I said last week, the rising from the dead bit was the belief of the first century Jews, of those that lived in the hope of this new and better world to come, but who died before it. They would be resurrected. So if you lived in the first century, you heard the word resurrection, you would immediately think of two things. Number one, you would think of a new era in which men and women would live unbroken lives in an unbroken world. And the second thing, you would think that the rising from the dead of all those who hoped for and fought for that era, but who died before it came. So here we are. Jesus had traveled to Jerusalem knowing he was going to die, but those around him had no idea. Last Sunday, people were waving palm branches and had expectations of him as the Messiah to save them from their hurt, pain, and suffering. And then less than 1 week, they started scattering away, and some of them even turned against him and voted for him to be hung. Even his inner circle was confused and didn't understand what was really happening. So with that in mind, let's continue the story about Jesus' journey through the cross. And we'll be looking at a particular story through the eyes of the Gospel of Mark. So Mark chapter 15, verse 40. So at this time, Jesus is dead on the cross, and the story says several women were watching from a distance. Now, the word watching that Mark uses here means a person is observing, but their observation is not leading to understanding. So just because a person sees something does not necessarily mean that they follow or understand what they are seeing. That's what Mark is telling us about these women. They are seeing Jesus die, but they don't understand what they are seeing. Remember, he was supposed to be their Messiah. They had longed for a time to see a changed world, and they thought Jesus was the one who was going to bring it. But here they are, watching him die. They assume that his death is just another example of how fair life can be. They assume that the world is ultimately a cold, hard place, and that's the way it is. Dead is dead. Broken is broken. Guilt is guilt. Loneliness is loneliness. When Mark is writing this story, his audience is very familiar with hurt, pain, and suffering. So among them were Mary Magdalene, Mary the mother of James, and Salome. In Galilee, these women had followed him and cared for his needs. Many other women who had come up with him to Jerusalem were also there. So clearly, and very unusual, I might add, for the ancient world, the movement that was organized around the personality and vision and leadership of Jesus was heavily populated by women. Just saying. They were followers of Jesus, just like the men were. And unlike the men who at this point had run away, These women were staying with Jesus to the bitter end. Then Mark inserts a story about a man who helped take care of Jesus' burial. Verse 42, it was preparation day, that is, the day before the Sabbath. Now, according to the Jewish law, a body cannot be buried on the Sabbath day. And since the Sabbath day began at 6 o'clock on Friday evening, Mark tells us that the evening approached. And so Joseph, a prominent member of the council, which is fascinating because he would have been one of the Jewish establishments, so he would have been there when Jesus went through his trial. He would have been there when the Sanhedrin was slapping and abusing Jesus. However, clearly he was not part of that abuse because Mark tells us that he was waiting for the kingdom of God. So here's a person who is perhaps a covert follower of Jesus, who sees, or I should say saw, Jesus as the hope of a resurrection. He thought that Jesus would be the one to inaugurate or launch the resurrection era of unbroken lives in an unbroken world. However, now Jesus is dead. That hope is gone. And all that remains for him to do is ensure that Jesus is at least given a decent burial. So in verse 43, Mark says that Joseph goes boldly to Pilate and asks for Jesus' body. Now, under normal circumstances, people who were sentenced to death on a cross were made to stay on that cross not only until they died, but until they decomposed. The cross was not only a means of execution, it was also a weapon of warfare. So the thinking behind this is that the enemies of the state would not only be made to die agonizing deaths in public, they would also be left to rot in public in order to dissuade other potential enemies of the state to behave themselves. However, the Roman justice system was reasonable. So, if a relative asked for the body of a loved one to be taken down from the cross and given a decent burial, most of the circumstances that request would be granted. The only exception is that if the person was executed for the crime of high treason, as Jesus was. So this man, in asking for the body of Jesus, is taking an enormous risk. That's why Mark says that Joseph went to Pilate boldly. He's aligning himself with the person convicted of high treason. However, verse 44, when Pilate hears Joseph asking for the body, he is initially surprised to hear that Jesus is already dead. Normally, a person would take a few days to die on the cross, not a few hours, as was the case with Jesus. So just to be sure, Pilate checks with the execution party, and upon discovering that Jesus was in fact dead, he gave the body to Joseph, which can only mean that Pilate knew full well that Jesus was innocent of the crime for which he was killed. No way under the Roman justice system would the body of a guilty person of treason be taken down just a few hours after they died. That defeated the whole object of crucifixion. So Joseph bought some linen cloth, took down the body, wrapped it in linen, and placed it in a tomb cut out of rock. Then he rolled a stone against the entrance of the tomb. So when a person died in first century Palestine, their body was washed and then scented with spices and then wrapped tightly in cloth. What happened after that was the body was placed on a stone shelf inside the tomb and left to decompose. Once the body had completely decomposed, the person's bones were then gathered up and placed inside something that's called an ossuary, a bone box. Often in the Old Testament, you read that so-and-so died and was gathered to his fathers. Well, that gathering refers to this. Pick up the bones, put them in the box. Verse 47, we're told that Mary Magdalene and Mary, the mother of Joses, saw where the body laid. Now, the saw word there he uses is the same word that he uses in verse 40. It means that they saw, but they did not understand what they were seeing. So they were seeing Jesus get buried, And they were attaching to that the image of their cultural understanding of what it means to die and get placed in a tomb. The body will decompose. The bones will then be gathered to the fathers in a bone box. Dead is dead. Broken is broken. So still operating with that mindset, in chapter 16 we read, Mary Magdalene, Mary the mother of James, and Salome brought spices so that they might go to anoint Jesus' body. And of course, in doing that to a loved one is an act of affection and devotion. So although these women don't understand the story of which they're a part of, they are still clearly committed to Jesus. They love him, or should I say, they loved him. And as they go to the grave of their loved ones, they do so with the same set of assumptions that you would when you go to the grave of your loved one. They assume that ultimately the darkness wins. The world is a cruel, hard place. Dead is dead. Broken is broken. That's how it works. Next, we read, so just after sunrise, they were on their way to the tomb. The men weren't there because they were sleeping in. And so the women asked each other, who will roll the stone away from the entrance of the tomb? Good question. Here is a first century tomb of the type that Jesus would have been buried in. As you can see, there is a large circular stone, and that stone is inserted into a slightly angled groove. So you roll the stone downward to seal the tomb. However, you have to roll it uphill to get into the tomb. Hence the question, who will roll the stone away from the entrance? Now, I'm sure if the women wanted to, they could have, but you know. However, when they get to the tomb, their worries about moving this heavy stone disappear when they see that the stone had been rolled away. Can you imagine what they thought? As they entered the tomb, they saw a young man dressed in a white robe sitting on the right side, and they were alarmed. Now, in the Bible, the word white is a clue word for angel. So as these women entered the tomb and see this angel, they immediately begin to have a what is this moment. This is outside their frame of reference. And so Mark says that they were alarmed. And of course, the word alarm means amazed, shocked, or afraid. In verse 6, the angel addresses their fear and says, "Don't be alarmed," he said. "You are looking for Jesus, the Nazarene, who was crucified." In the Gospels, the word looking is always associated with expectations. So the angel says, "You are looking," by which he meant you are looking for your preconceived ideas, or you are looking with eyes that assume that things are the way they are. He is risen. He is not here. See the place where they laid him, but go, tell his disciples and Peter, he is going ahead of you into Galilee. There you will see him, just as he told you. Trembling and bewildered, the women went out and fled the tomb. They said nothing to anyone because they were afraid. Now, here's the thing about Mark. This is where the original story ends. If you look at your Bibles, you'll notice that someone else added the ending to the story. But Mark's original gospel, or Mark's original manuscript, doesn't go any further than this. And I think this was intentional on his part. Mark wanted his audience to feel something that day as he was retelling the story of the life and death of Jesus. Mark was inviting his audience on a journey despite their hurt, pain, and suffering. Remember, his audience at that time knew something about suffering, and they too would have been waiting for a resurrection of some type. Mark wanted his audience to become followers of Jesus, and sometimes to be a follower of Jesus sometimes means you don't have the ending to the story. Reading Mark's narrative is like watching a movie that stops before the last scene. You're left wondering, what happened next? So why does Mark tell this compelling story about Jesus and his life and ministry and then leave us hanging at the end? Why doesn't he give us details like the other Gospels clearly indicate that after this, Jesus walked around and appeared to the disciples? There was no mistake that in the other Gospels that Jesus died and was buried and rose again. There's people that witnessed it. It happened, but not in Mark's Gospel. Why? What is he teaching us about leaving out these crucial details? Well, perhaps it wasn't the end. If that early morning over 2,000 years ago was the end, then what we would have left is a neat little story about a great man who challenged the political system, who loved and healed people, a static piece of historical lore that we could all pull out once a year, dust it off, read it one more time, and then carefully put it back on the shelf until next year. Mark knew that the end of his written account was not the end of the story. In fact, what happened that morning in that cold breaking of the dawn was just the beginning. No one who found the empty tomb that morning believed that the resurrection was even possible. The only way they came to really understand that their friend Jesus was in actual fact who he said he was, the only way the unbelievable became real to them was when they began to allow the story to reach its way into their lives and change them, until they were absolutely and positively compelled to finish the story for themselves with their very own lives. And so today, far away from these events that occurred in the Gospel of Mark, if Easter is going to mean anything to you and to me, just like the first disciples, we are going to have to finish the story ourselves. This glorious day is not about Easter eggs, brunches, nice clothes, Easter bunnies. It's not even about trying to imagine a Galilean man in rough burlap robes and rustic sandals making his way into our church to uncover archaeological evidence of the resurrection. We are here because we need hope for our lives, because we believe, we know that to finish this story means to allow the resurrected Christ to enter our lives, to transform our pain and our fear, to give us new life and a new relationship with each other, because in our humanity, like the first disciples, we tend to turn from the tomb in utter defeat and crippling fear. But we have seen the power of the resurrected Christ in our lives and in the world, and what was once so desperately unbelievable has now become for us an urgent proclamation. What happens next is the real power of the Easter story. When we turn and leave this place, will the risen Savior take up residence in our hearts, shaping, changing, renewing, transforming, making us agents of healing and hope in the world? He is not here. He has risen, the man said. The world was changed because of the courage of those women who in fact did go and tell the others about Jesus. They continued their story. And so, my friends, today is Easter Sunday. And Easter Sunday is a day when followers of Jesus shout, sing, and enthusiastically celebrate the resurrection. And what we are celebrating is not the day that we will leave this world and go to another one, but that Jesus has started something beautiful in this world that we call home. Resurrection is the affirmation of life. Resurrection says that what we do with our life matters. Every act of compassion matters. Every work of art that celebrates the good and true matters. Every fair and honest act of business, every kind word, they all matter, and they will all go on in God's good world. Nothing will be forgotten. Nothing will be wasted. It all has its place. At LifePoint, we intentionally give to the food bank on a regular basis. At LifePoint, we intentionally look for ways to serve the community. The big story that we have bought into as Christians is not someday we will abandon this place, The big story is that God has not abandoned this place, and life after life, he is rescuing this world. That is why the language of the New Testament is the language of newness. Jesus says, I will make all things new, new people, new creation, new birth. The resurrection is a celebration of starting over. So the voice in your head that says you will always struggle with depression, the voice in your head that reminds you that you will always live with the shame, the voice in your head that says your past will always determine your future, the voice in your head that says that nothing that can be done for the poor children in Africa, it's all challenged by the resurrection. The resurrection is a wake-up call for those who have bought into the lie that tomorrow has to be like today. It's a new day. We can shout, we can sing, we can enthusiastically celebrate the resurrection because the journey does not end. It continues. In a moment, we can stand together, or you don't have to stand if you don't want to, but we're going to sing and celebrate the life that Jesus has given us. John 10:10 says that I have come that you may have life, and life abundantly. I know life is hard. I know it's bumpy. I know it's full of pain, setbacks, news that you don't want to hear. I get that. But the story of resurrection allows us to continue this journey that he started, and he's inviting you and me today on a journey to finish this story. That's why we have church, a weekly reminder of the resurrection and the reason that why we are here in this world. We need this reminder so we don't fall into the trap of it is what it is. No, it's a new day. It's a new opportunity for you to jump on board and ride this journey, Jesus' journey together. Are you with me, brothers and sisters? Amen. Let me pray, and then we're going to sing a song together. Jesus, we grieve that the torture and sorrow that you endured on the cross were necessary to save humanity. You didn't want us to be enslaved by the sin of this world, so you sacrificed yourself so that love could win. It is love that hung upon the cross and gave up everything to rescue us. It is finished was a cry of victory because you defeated everything that holds us in captivity. Because of you, we can experience a full life here and now, an abundant life full of love, hope, peace, and joy. And we say yes to continuing this journey that you started over 2,000 years ago. Amen.